When you hear the name Eratosthenes, one thing probably comes to mind. The guy who measured the Earth. And yeah, he did that. But saying that's all he did is like saying Leonardo da Vinci was just a guy who painted the Mona Lisa. Eratosthenes was like a Renaissance man, almost 2,000 years before the Renaissance was even a thing. He was a mathematician, a geographer, a poet, an astronomer, you name it. So let's dive into the story of the man who first showed us just how big our world really is.
Right, and this is the big one. It's the question that really cemented his place in history. And honestly, it sounds impossible. How could a single person, more than 2,000 years ago, figure out the size of the whole planet? There were no satellites, no fancy computers, just sticks, shadows, and his own incredible mind. But here's the thing, it wasn't magic. It was a masterclass in scientific thinking.
So, as the head of the legendary Library of Alexandria, Eratosthenes was literally surrounded by all the knowledge in the world. But you know what's amazing? His most famous experiment didn't come from some dusty old scroll. Nope. It all started with a pretty simple observation about the sun.
Okay, so the sheer genius of this is just incredible. He'd heard that in a city called Cyrene, on the summer solstice, the midday sun shone straight down to the bottom of a deep well. No shadows. But he knew that at the exact same time back in Alexandria, hundreds of miles to the north, a stick in the ground did cast a shadow. So he measured the angle of that shadow and found it was about 7.2 degrees. Now, 7.2 degrees is exactly 1/50th of a full circle. So he reasoned if the distance between the two cities was 5,000 stadia, then the total circumference of the Earth must be 50 times that distance. The rest was just simple math. And the result he got? Well, depending on which stadia he was using, it was a bit of a variable unit back then. His calculation comes out to around 41,750 kilometers. Just to put that in perspective for you, the actual circumference of the Earth at the equator is about 40,075 kilometers. I mean, that is just mind-blowing for his time.
Seriously, think about that. Using just shadows and wells, he came up with a number that might have had an error margin of less than 1%. No way was this a lucky guess. This was pure, brilliant, scientific deduction at work.
But here's the thing about a mind like his, measuring the entire world, that was just the beginning. He wasn't satisfied just knowing how big the world was. He wanted to describe it, to map it. And in doing that, he basically invented a whole new branch of science. Yeah, he literally invented the word geography. It comes from his work Geographica, which in Greek just means writing about the Earth. He wasn't just drawing pictures of places. He was building a whole new way to think about our planet, a system for understanding it all. What he wanted to do was create the first truly scientific map of the known world. And to do it, he came up with a revolutionary new idea, laying a grid of lines over the map. Basically, the great-great-grandfather of our modern latitude and longitude.
You have to understand, before this, maps were more like stories than science. By adding this grid system, he made it possible to actually calculate distances. He put over 400 cities on his map, divided the planet into the 5 climate zones we still learn about today, and he even cracked the ancient mystery of why the Nile River flooded every year, correctly figuring out it was due to heavy rains way down at its source.
So you think being the father of geography is enough for one resume, right? Well, not for Eratosthenes. That was just one part of his brilliant mind. His intellect went way beyond mapping, diving deep into things like pure mathematics.
Let's talk about math. Because he's also famous for this beautiful, super clever algorithm called the sieve of Eratosthenes. It's a surprisingly simple way to find all the prime numbers up to any limit you want, and believe it or not, it's still a really important idea in number theory today. Okay, so how does this thing work? It's actually really simple. Picture a big grid of all the numbers. You start with the very first prime, which is 2, and you just go through and cross out every multiple of 2. That's it.
All right, what's next? You just find the next number that hasn't been crossed out. In this case, it's 3. That's our next prime. So now you do the same thing. You go through and cross out every multiple of 3. You can already see a pattern taking shape.
And you just keep going. You do it again with the next uncrossed number, 5, and then 7, and on and on. The numbers that are left, the ones that fall through the sieve, well, those are your primes. It's so simple but so powerful. A perfect example of how he thought.
And his genius didn't stop on Earth. Nope, it reached for the stars, literally. He calculated the tilt of our planet's axis with amazing accuracy.
He created a star catalog that included the myths behind 44 constellations, and get this, he proposed adding a leap day every 4 years. He figured this out almost 200 years before Julius Caesar and the Julian calendar made it official.
Okay, so with a list of achievements this long, you'd assume this guy was the undisputed champion of the ancient world, right? The smartest man alive, no question. Well, it's a bit more complicated and a lot more interesting than that. You see, people had 2 nicknames for him, and they tell a fascinating story. Some called him Panthathalos, like an Olympic athlete who's good at 5 different events, an all-rounder. But others called him Beta, as in the second letter of the alphabet, number 2. Why? Because the thinking went, for anything he did, there was always someone who was just a little bit better, an alpha. And often, that alpha was his friend, the legendary Archimedes.
But in other ways, he was so far ahead of his time, it's startling. He actually pushed back against Aristotle's idea that the world was just split between Greeks and barbarians. Eratosthenes basically said, hey, there are good and bad people in every nation. That was a hugely progressive idea for the ancient world.
And he was definitely not afraid to stir the pot. He solved the super famous math puzzle called the Delium problem by building a clever little mechanical device. But some of the other mathematicians were not impressed. They thought a real mathematician should only use a compass and a straight edge, and they basically accused him of cheating, saying his solution was unworthy. So, what does this all mean? How should we really think about this guy? Was he just number 2, a jack of all trades but a master of none? Or was something else going on here? Let's take a final look at his real legacy. And this is really the heart of it. Eratosthenes wasn't number 2. He was a founder, an originator. He's the father of geography. He created scientific chronology, the systematic dating of history. His work laid the groundwork for huge parts of mathematics and the science of measuring the Earth. That whole beta thing, it was his superpower. Being brilliant at so many different things made him the only person who could see how they all fit together. And that really leaves us with a fascinating question, doesn't it? What is true genius? Is it about drilling down and being the absolute best at one single thing? Or is it the rare ability to stand back and see the connections between everything? When you look at it that way, maybe being called beta is the highest praise you can get.